The elevator stopped between floors at 3:47 a.m. Sarah pressed every button, but nothing happened. The emergency phone was dead. Then she heard scratching sounds coming from above the ceiling tiles. Something was moving up there. Something that shouldn't exist in a building that had been abandoned for 3 years. As the lights flickered once and went out completely, Sarah realized she wasn't alone. And whatever was sharing this metal box with her had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally press the call button. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen had broken into the Meridian Tower for one reason. The server room on the 42nd floor contained evidence that would destroy her former employer. 3 months ago, Nexus Corporation had fired her for asking too many questions about their government contracts. Now she had 40 minutes before the security patrol made their next round. The building's main elevators were disabled, but Sarah knew about the service elevator tucked behind the maintenance corridor. Her keycard, cloned from the janitor she'd befriended during her employment, still worked. The doors slid open with a mechanical wheeze, revealing scratched metal walls and a control panel missing half its buttons. She stepped inside and pressed 42. The elevator lurched upward with grinding sounds that suggested it hadn't been serviced in months. Floor numbers crawled past on the digital display, 12, 13, 14. Sarah checked her phone. No signal, but that was expected in the elevator shaft. At floor 28, the elevator shuddered and slowed. Then it stopped completely. The display flickered between 28 and 29 before going dark. Sarah pressed the door open button repeatedly. Nothing. The emergency phone hung silent when she lifted it. That's when she heard the first scratch. It came from directly above her head, like claws dragging across metal. Sarah looked up at the acoustic ceiling tiles, their white surface stained with age and water damage. The scratching moved from left to right, then back again, deliberate and rhythmic. Rats, she told herself. Old buildings always had rats, but the scratching was too heavy, too purposeful. It traced patterns across the ceiling, as if something was examining the space above her, mapping it out. Sarah pressed herself against the corner of the elevator, watching the tiles. One of them sagged slightly under invisible weight. The building's electrical system groaned, and the lights dimmed to half power. In the weaker illumination, Sarah noticed something she'd missed before. Thin scratches ran along the elevator walls, starting about 7 feet up and extending to the ceiling. They looked fresh. Her phone buzzed with a text message, impossible since there was no signal. The message was from her own number. "Look up." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the phone screen. The message couldn't exist. She hadn't sent it to herself, and even if she had, it wouldn't have been delivered without cell service. She looked at the timestamp, 3:47 a.m. That was now. That was exactly now. Above her, the scratching stopped. The silence felt worse than the sound had. Then the ceiling tile in the center began to bend downward, as if something heavy was pressing against it from above. The tile cracked along its edge, and a thin line of dust fell onto Sarah's shoulder. She brushed it off and tasted metal in the air like old pennies or blood. The elevator's emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red. In that crimson glow, Sarah saw that the scratches on the walls weren't random marks. They formed letters, words, sentences carved into the metal. The same message repeated over and over in different handwriting. "It waits between floors." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her own number. "It knows you're here." The temperature in the elevator dropped noticeably. Sarah's breath began to fog in the suddenly frigid air. The scratching resumed, but now it was coming from all sides, above, behind the walls, even from below the floor. Whatever was out there had surrounded her completely. A drop of something dark and viscous fell from the damaged ceiling tile and landed on the back of Sarah's hand. She jerked away, wiping the substance on her jacket. It left a black stain that seemed to move and shift in the red emergency lighting. The liquid had a smell like copper and decay, and where it had touched her skin, she felt a burning sensation. The elevator shuddered and dropped 6 inches before catching itself with a metallic scream. Sarah was thrown against the wall, her shoulder striking the scratched surface. The impact sent pain shooting down her arm, but it also revealed something else. Where her body had hit the wall, some of the carved messages became clearer in the emergency lighting. Sarah Chen, floor 29, 3:47 a.m. Her name, her exact location, the exact time, carved into metal that should have taken hours to scratch, in a building that had been empty for 3 years. The phone buzzed incessantly now, message after message from her own number. "We've been waiting. The server room was never the goal. You were always meant to come here. Some elevators don't go up or down. They go somewhere else entirely." Sarah's breathing became rapid and shallow. The air in the elevator was getting thinner, as if something was consuming the oxygen. The red emergency lights began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, faster and faster. On the walls, new scratches were appearing in real time, carved by invisible claws. "Welcome to floor 29. But according to the building schematics, there was no floor 29. The Meridian Tower had been built with floors 1 through 52, then a mechanical level and the roof. 29 was supposed to be just another office floor, indistinguishable from any other. The ceiling tile cracked completely and fell to the floor with a wet sound. Through the opening, Sarah could see nothing but absolute darkness. Not the darkness of an unlit room, but the darkness of a space that had never known light. A darkness that seemed thick and alive. Something pale and impossibly long dropped partway through the opening before retreating back into the void. Sarah caught only a glimpse. White flesh stretched over too many joints, fingers that bent in directions fingers shouldn't bend. Her phone screen cracked spontaneously, spiderwebbing across the display. Through the fractured glass, one final message appeared. "The elevator only goes to floor 29 now." The elevator has always only gone to floor 29. You just never noticed before. The lights went out completely. In the perfect darkness, Sarah heard the elevator doors slide open with a cheerful ding, as if they'd reached their intended destination. A rush of air carried impossible scents. Flowers that had been dead for decades, rain that had never touched the ground, the breath of something that had been holding it for far too long. From the darkness beyond the open doors came a voice that sounded almost like her own. "Sarah Chen, we've been expecting you. Please step out. Floor 29 has so much to show you." In the absolute blackness, Sarah realized that the scratching hadn't been coming from above the elevator at all. It had been coming from inside the walls, inside the floor, inside the very space she occupied. The elevator hadn't been taking her up through the building. It had been taking her down into something that existed between the floors, in the spaces that weren't supposed to exist. And now, after 3 years of waiting in an empty building, floor 29 finally had a visitor. The scratching resumed, but now it was coming from behind her, encouraging her forward into whatever lay beyond the open doors. Sarah stepped backward, pressing herself against the rear wall of the elevator. The voice calling from the darkness beyond the open doors had grown more insistent, layering multiple versions of itself until it sounded like a chorus of Sarahs, all speaking in unison. "I'm not getting out," she whispered to the empty air. The response came immediately, but not from the doorway. It came from directly behind her ear, a breath that felt like ice crystals forming on her skin. "You already have." Sarah spun around, but the elevator wall was solid behind her. Impossible. She pressed the button for any floor, ground level, 52, anywhere but here. The panel remained dark and unresponsive. But when she touched the button marked B for the basement, it lit up with a soft blue glow. The doors slid shut with that same cheerful ding. The elevator began to move, but not in any direction Sarah understood. It felt like falling and rising simultaneously, like being turned inside out while spinning sideways through dimensions that didn't have names. Her inner ear screamed in protest, and she gripped the handrail until her knuckles went white. When the motion stopped, the doors opened onto something that definitely wasn't a basement. Sarah found herself looking at an exact replica of her old office at Nexus Corporation. Same beige carpet, same fluorescent lights humming overhead, same cluster of cubicles arranged in perfect rows. Her desk sat in the northeast corner, still cluttered with the personal items she'd never had a chance to collect after being fired. A coffee mug with a chip in the handle, a small succulent plant she'd named Gerald, 3 pens that had run out of ink months before she'd been terminated. But everything was wrong in subtle ways that made her skin crawl. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that hurt her teeth. The carpet was the right color, but felt spongy underfoot, like walking on flesh. And every computer screen in the office was displaying the same message in bright green text. Sarah Chen, personnel file, accessing. She took a cautious step out of the elevator. The moment her foot touched the office floor, every screen in the room changed to display her employee photo. Dozens of identical images of her own face stared back at her from monitors throughout the space. A phone rang at her old desk. Sarah approached slowly, recognizing the specific ringtone, the one she'd programmed for internal calls. She picked up the handset. "Nexus Corporation, this is Sarah," she heard herself say. But she hadn't spoken. The voice was coming from the phone, her own voice from months ago, professional and slightly tired. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sarah, we need to talk," said another voice through the receiver. "Her former supervisor, Marcus Webb. Can you come to conference room B? There's been development with the Blackwater files." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, remembering that exact conversation. It had happened 3 days before she was fired, when she'd first discovered the irregularities in Nexus Corporation's government contracts. Marcus had seemed nervous during that meeting, constantly checking his watch and avoiding eye contact. A soft chime echoed through the office, and the elevator doors closed behind her. When she turned around, the elevator was gone entirely. Just a blank wall where it had been moments before. Conference room B was exactly where she remembered it, down the hallway past the break room. As she walked, motion sensor lights flickered on ahead of her and died behind her, creating a traveling bubble of illumination in otherwise perfect darkness. Her footsteps echoed strangely, as if the hallway was much longer than it should be. The conference room door stood ajar, spilling warm yellow light into the corridor. Sarah pushed it open and stepped inside. Marcus Webb sat at the far end of the polished table, but he wasn't quite right. His suit was the same charcoal grey he'd always worn. His tie knotted with the same precision, but his skin had a waxy quality that reminded Sarah of mannequins in department store windows. When he smiled at her, his teeth were too white and too sharp. "Sarah, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair directly across from him. His voice had the right inflection, the same slight Boston accent, but it came from everywhere in the room at once, rather than from his mouth. "We have so much to discuss." "You're not Marcus," Sarah said, remaining standing. "Marcus is afraid of confined spaces. He would never hold a meeting in this room with the door closed." The thing wearing Marcus Webb's face tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve. "Details, Sarah. You always were obsessed with details. That's why we chose you." The conference room began to shift around them. The walls stretched upward, the ceiling disappearing into shadows. The polished table elongated, stretching away from Sarah until Marcus appeared to be sitting hundreds of feet away. But his voice remained close, intimate, as if he were whispering directly into her ear. "The Blackwater files were never about defense contracts," he continued. "They were about places like this, spaces that exist in the margins of reality. Nexus Corporation has been mapping them for decades, cataloging the entities that live in between." More figures began to materialize in the chairs around the impossibly long table. Sarah recognized all of them. Her former co-workers, her college roommate, her high school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, even her grandmother, who had died when Sarah was 12. All of them had the same waxy, artificial quality as Marcus, and all of them were staring at her with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. "You fired me," Sarah said, focusing on Marcus. "You had me escorted from the building by security," the Marcus thing laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. "We promoted you, Sarah, to a much more important position. You just didn't realize it at the time." The grandmother thing leaned forward, its voice a perfect replica of the woman Sarah had loved. "We needed someone smart enough to find us, dear. Someone curious enough to break into a building after hours. Someone who would press the button for the service elevator. All those late nights you stayed at the office," added the college roommate thing. "We were watching, learning your patterns, understanding what motivated you." Sarah backed toward the door, but when she reached for the handle, her hand passed through empty air. The door had become translucent, like looking through water. "The building was never abandoned," Marcus explained. "It's been our research facility all along. A place where we could study the boundaries between dimensions. You've been our most promising subject, Sarah. 3 years of observation, and you've exceeded all our expectations." The fluorescent lights in the room began to strobe, and in the flickering illumination, Sarah saw that her former co-workers weren't sitting in chairs at all. They were suspended in the air by threads too thin to see, like marionettes controlled by something vast and invisible above them. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. Every figure around the table spoke in unison. "We want you to understand that you never left floor 29. You never left the elevator. Everything you think happened afterward, walking through the office, coming to this conference room, having this conversation, it's all still happening in that metal box between floors." The conference room dissolved like sugar in rain. Sarah found herself back in the elevator, but now it was different. The walls were transparent, showing her dozens of other elevators, stretching away in all directions like a 3-dimensional honeycomb. In each elevator car, she could see herself at different moments, pressing the call button, reading the text messages, stepping out into the fake office, sitting in various conference rooms, having the same conversation with different versions of her past. All the Sarahs turned to look at her simultaneously. "Which one is real?" they asked in perfect synchronization. "Which Sarah gets to leave?" The elevator began to move again, but now Sarah could see outside through the transparent walls. She was traveling through a vast mechanical structure, passing floor after floor of impossible spaces, offices that existed in the 1950s, libraries filled with books that wrote themselves, hospital corridors where the patients were geometric shapes that pulsed with their own light. On floor 31, she saw a laboratory where scientists in hazmat suits were dissecting something that looked like a folded star. On floor 28, a courtroom where shadows argued cases before a judge made of television static. On floor 35, a daycare center where children played with toys that phased in and out of existence. "The Meridian Tower," said a voice that might have been her own, "was built as a conduit, a way for entities from other dimensions to study 3-dimensional beings like yourself. You've been very helpful, Sarah. Your reactions, your problem-solving methods, your capacity for fear, all invaluable data." The elevator stopped at floor 52, the top floor Sarah remembered from the building schematics. But when the doors opened, she was looking at the lobby she'd entered through hours ago. The same marble floors, the same security desk, the same revolving doors leading out to the street. A security guard sat behind the desk reading a newspaper. He looked up as the elevator dinged and smiled at Sarah with genuine warmth. "Evening, Miss Chen. Working late again?" Sarah stared at him. It was the same guard who'd been on duty when she'd broken in. Same uniform, same name tag, reading Ronald. But that was impossible. She'd waited until his shift changed to enter the building. "What time is it?" she asked. Ronald checked his watch. "Just coming up at midnight." "You've been here about 4 hours now. That Nexus project keeps you busy?" Through the lobby windows, Sarah could see the city street exactly as it had been when she'd arrived. Same parked cars, same flickering streetlight on the corner, same homeless man sleeping in the doorway of the shop across the street. Nothing had changed. Nothing had moved, as if no time had passed at all. Sarah walked toward the revolving doors, her footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if gravity was increasing with every forward movement. When she reached the glass doors, she pressed against them, but they wouldn't budge. The metal frame had somehow fused seamlessly with the surrounding wall. "Door's been having trouble all week," Ronald said from behind the security desk, not looking up from his newspaper. "Maintenance keeps saying they'll fix it tomorrow." Sarah pressed harder, throwing her full weight against the glass. The doors didn't even rattle in their frame. Outside, she could see the street clearly. Cars parked along the curb, the flickering streetlight, the homeless man still sleeping in the same position. But when she knocked on the glass, there was no sound. Her fist met perfect silence. "The windows don't open either," Ronald added conversationally. "Building safety regulations, you know. Everything's sealed tight for climate control." Sarah turned to face him. "Ronald, how long have you worked here?" He folded his newspaper and looked at her with the same pleasant expression. "Oh, must be going on 15 years now. Started right after they finished construction. Been through a lot of changes, this building has." "What kind of changes?" Ronald's smile widened, revealing teeth that were subtly wrong, too many incisors, molars where canines should be. "Well, they added the extra floors, for one thing. Used to be 52 floors when I started. Now we've got, I'd say about 237. Hard to keep count with all the renovations." Sarah's blood went cold. 237 floors? Give or take. They keep adding more. Last week they put in a whole section of floors that only exist on Wednesdays. Very efficient use of space, if you ask me. The lobby around them began to stretch upward, the ceiling rising into darkness. The marble floor beneath Sarah's feet remained solid, but the walls on either side started moving outward, creating a vast atrium that hadn't existed moments before. High above, she could see the faint glow of floor after floor, extending into impossible heights. "The Meridian Tower is what you might call a prototype," Ronald continued, standing up from behind his desk. He was much taller than she remembered, at least 7 feet, with arms that hung down past his knees. The first successful attempt at creating a stable interdimensional anchor point. A place where multiple realities can exist simultaneously without collapsing into each other. Sarah backed away from him, but the lobby stretched to accommodate her retreat, always keeping the same distance between them. "You're not human." "Not originally, no," Ronald admitted. "But I've been practicing. 15 years of watching people come and go, learning their mannerisms, their speech patterns, their expectations. I think I've gotten quite good at it." The elevators behind Sarah chimed simultaneously, all 6 of them at once. She turned to see the doors sliding open, revealing not elevator cars, but 6 different environments. One showed a tropical beach at sunset, another a snow-covered forest, a third what looked like the interior of a spaceship. In the 4th, she could see her childhood bedroom exactly as it had been when she was 8 years old. "Each elevator goes to a different probability," Ronald explained, his voice now coming from multiple directions at once. "Different versions of your life, different choices you could have made. The building exists at the intersection of all these possibilities." Sarah approached the elevator, showing her childhood bedroom. Through the open doors, she could see her old stuffed rabbit sitting on the bed, the glow-in-the-dark stars she'd stuck to the ceiling, the crack in the wall where she'd accidentally thrown a baseball. Even the smell was right. Her mother's lavender perfume mixed with the vanilla candles she always lit in the evening. "That's from timeline designation 7 Alpha, Ronald said, now standing directly behind her, though she hadn't heard him move. "The version where your parents never divorced, where you became a veterinarian instead of a data analyst, where you never worked for Nexus Corporation at all." In that timeline's bedroom, Sarah could see movement. A small figure passed by the doorway, herself at age 8, carrying the same stuffed rabbit. The child looked toward the elevator doors for a moment, as if she could sense someone watching, then continued down the hallway. "She can see you," Ronald whispered. "All the other versions can. They've been trying to warn you for months. Haven't you noticed the dreams? The feeling that someone was watching you? The way mirrors sometimes showed you things that weren't quite right?" Sarah had noticed. Late-night dreams where she was running through endless corridors. Mornings when she'd catch glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision. Moments when her reflection seemed to lag half a second behind her actual movements. She'd attributed it all to stress from her job search. "The other Sarahs have been trying to help you avoid this moment," Ronald continued. "But paradox is a tricky thing. The more they tried to change your path, the more certain it became that you'd end up here." Causality has a sense of humor. The elevator to Timeline 7 Alpha closed with a soft chime. In its place, a new environment appeared, what looked like a morgue, with rows of metal tables covered by white sheets. On the nearest table, Sarah could see the outline of a human form beneath the fabric. "Timeline 12 Beta," Ronald noted. "The version where you died in a car accident 3 months ago. That Sarah would have given anything to trade places with you right now." More elevators appeared, materializing out of the expanding walls. Dozens of them, then hundreds, each showing a different possibility. Sarah saw versions of herself as a successful artist living in Paris, as a mother of 3 children in suburban Ohio, as a homeless woman sleeping under a bridge, as an astronaut floating in zero gravity, as a patient in a psychiatric hospital, as a corporate executive in a corner office, as a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit. "Every choice creates a branch," Ronald explained. "Every possibility spawns a new timeline, but they're all connected here in the space between spaces. The Meridian Tower exists in all realities simultaneously." Sarah walked among the elevators, staring into the different versions of her life. In one, she saw herself as an old woman, sitting in a rocking chair and knitting. In another, she was a teenager again, studying for finals in her high school library. In a third, she appeared to be some kind of winged creature, soaring through clouds above a city that looked nothing like any place on Earth. "Which one is real?" she asked. "All of them," Ronald replied. "None of them. Reality is a consensus, Sarah. A shared agreement about what exists and what doesn't, but consensus can be influenced." One elevator showed her standing in this exact lobby, having this exact conversation with Ronald, but in that version, she was watching another Sarah in another elevator, who was watching another Sarah in another elevator, creating an infinite regression of Sarahs, observing Sarahs, observing Sarahs. "The building feeds on possibility," Ronald said. "Each new timeline generates energy we can harvest. Your presence here has already created 17 new probability branches just in the last few minutes." "Very efficient." Sarah stopped in front of an elevator that showed only darkness. Not the darkness of an unlit room, but the complete absence of anything at all. A void so absolute that looking at it hurt her eyes. "Timeline 0, Ronald said quietly. "The original point from which all others diverge. Before choice, before possibility, before existence itself. It's not a pleasant place to visit. How do I get home?" Sarah asked. Ronald's laugh was like the sound of glass breaking in reverse. "Home to which timeline? Home to which version of yourself? You've seen the alternatives now, Sarah. You've witnessed the infinite possibilities of who you could be. How can you choose just one?" The elevators began to close one by one. The beach disappeared behind sliding doors, followed by the forest, the spaceship, her childhood bedroom. Each closure felt like a small death, a future erased, a possibility abandoned forever. "But there is one way," Ronald said as the last elevator door slid shut, leaving them alone in the vast lobby. "One timeline that remains open, one choice that hasn't been made yet." Behind him, a new elevator appeared. This one had no doors. Just an opening into what looked like the Meridian Tower's service elevator, the same scratched walls, the same missing buttons, the same flickering emergency lighting she remembered from the beginning. "You can go back," Ronald said. "Back to the moment you first pressed the call button. back to the choice that brought you here. But you'll remember everything. Every timeline, every possibility, every version of yourself you've seen tonight. And you'll have to choose whether to press that button again. Sarah stared at the familiar elevator car. What happens if I don't press it? Then none of this happens. You go home to your apartment, continue your job search, live your normal life in timeline prime. But you'll always wonder about the other possibilities. You'll always feel the weight of the choices you didn't make. And if I do press it? Ronald's smile became something inhuman, stretching too wide across his face. Then you become part of the building's collection. Another Sarah to add to our catalogue of possibilities. Another source of timeline branches for us to harvest. The service elevator waited, its doors open, the scratched walls reflecting the lobby's fluorescent lights. Sarah could hear the familiar mechanical hum of its systems and smell the metallic air from its ventilation shaft. Behind her, Ronald began to dissolve like smoke, his voice becoming distant and echoing. The choice is yours, Sarah Chen. It always has been. The choice is always yours. The lobby faded around her, leaving only the elevator and the infinite darkness beyond. Somewhere in that darkness, Sarah could hear her own voice, all the versions of herself from all the timelines she'd witnessed, whispering the same question over and over. Which Sarah gets to choose? Sarah stood motionless in the void, surrounded by the whispers of her alternate selves. The service elevator hung suspended in nothingness like a metal coffin, its doors gaping open in silent invitation. But now she could see beyond its scratched walls, through them as if the metal had become glass. Inside the elevator car, another Sarah was pressed against the corner, staring up at cracked ceiling tiles. This Sarah was younger, wearing the same clothes but somehow more innocent. She hadn't yet learned about the timelines, hadn't seen the impossible flaws, hadn't spoken with Ronald or witnessed her infinite possibilities. "That's you from 3 hours ago," came a voice from the darkness. Not Ronald this time, but something else entirely. Something that sounded like the building itself, the creak of settling steel, the whisper of air through ventilation shafts, the electrical hum of 1,000 fluorescent lights. The moment before you understood what this place really was. More elevators materialized around her, each containing a different version of herself at various points in the night. In one, Sarah was reading the text messages on her phone. In another, she was stepping into the fake office. A third showed her sitting in the conference room with the Marcus thing and its army of impossible colleagues. Each decision point creates a new elevator, the building's voice continued. Each choice spawns another you. Look closer. Sarah approached the nearest elevator. The Sarah inside was holding her phone, but instead of showing the impossible messages from her own number, the screen displayed something else entirely. Security camera footage of the real Meridian Tower. She could see herself in the lobby, 3 hours earlier, using her cloned keycard to access the service elevator. But in this footage, she wasn't alone. Dozens of translucent figures surrounded her, previous visitors to floor 29, all of them following the same routine she had. They pressed the same buttons, rode the same elevator, made the same discoveries. An endless parade of people who had thought they were breaking into an abandoned building for their own unique reasons. "The building collects investigators," the voice explained. "People who ask too many questions, who dig too deep, who can't leave well enough alone. Each one thinks they're the first to discover the truth." In another elevator, Sarah watched herself having a conversation with Ronald in the lobby, but the words were different. Instead of talking about timelines and possibilities, this version was discussing financial records and offshore accounts. This Sarah believed she was uncovering a money laundering operation, not an interdimensional research facility. "Every visitor sees what makes sense to them," the building continued. "The conspiracy theorist finds evidence of government cover-ups. The paranormal investigator encounters ghosts and demons. The corporate whistleblower discovers financial crimes. Each person's preconceptions shape their experience. Sarah moved to another elevator, where she saw herself in what appeared to be a completely different building, a hospital where she was investigating medical malpractice. In this version, the scratching sounds came from rats in the walls. The text messages were from an anonymous informant, and Ronald was a night shift orderly with information about illegal organ harvesting. "But you're different," the voice said, and now it was coming from directly inside her head. "You're the first one to see through the illusions, the first to understand that all the versions are happening simultaneously." The elevators began to move, rising and falling in complex patterns around her. Sarah realized she was seeing the building's true structure, not a linear stack of floors, but a vast, three-dimensional web of interconnected possibilities. Each elevator was a node in the network, each passenger a data point being processed and catalogued. "We study cause and effect," the voice explained. "How small changes in circumstance can completely alter a person's perception of reality. You've provided us with exceptional data, Sarah. Your ability to adapt to impossible situations while maintaining rational thought patterns is remarkable." One elevator stopped directly in front of her. Inside, she saw herself from a timeline where she had never worked for Nexus Corporation at all. This Sarah was a night security guard, making her rounds in the Meridian Tower as part of her regular job. She was discovering the same anomalies, but interpreting them as the work of squatters or vandals, rather than interdimensional entities. In Timeline 43 Gamma, you're trying to solve a mystery about homeless people living in the abandoned floors, the voice noted. In Timeline 78 Delta, you're investigating reports of toxic mold causing hallucinations. In Timeline 156 Beta, you believe you're experiencing a psychotic break brought on by job-related stress. More elevators appeared, showing increasingly divergent versions of the night's events. In one, Sarah was a police detective investigating missing persons reports. In another, she was a demolition worker doing a final safety inspection. A third showed her as an urban explorer with a YouTube channel, documenting her infiltration of abandoned buildings. "But in every timeline, you end up here," the voice said. "In this moment, facing this choice, the variables change, but the outcome remains constant. You are drawn to floor 29 across all possibilities." Sarah noticed that some of the elevators were empty, their cars moving through the complex network without passengers. "What are those?" "Futures," the voice replied. "Timelines that haven't been populated yet, possibilities waiting for someone to make the choices that will bring them into existence." One of the empty elevators stopped nearby. Through its open doors, Sarah could see what looked like her apartment, but aged decades into the future. The walls were covered with photographs and newspaper clippings, all connected by red string, like a conspiracy theorist's wall. At the center of the web was a picture of the Meridian Tower, Timeline 892 Epsilon, the voice explained. "The version where you escape tonight, but spend the rest of your life obsessed with this place. You become a researcher, dedicating 40 years to studying interdimensional phenomena. You never marry, never have children, never pursue any other interest. Your entire existence becomes focused on understanding what happened to you here." Another empty elevator showed her apartment again, but this time it was completely normal. No conspiracy wall, no research materials, just the ordinary living space of someone who had moved on with their life. Timeline 15 Zeta. You leave tonight with no memory of these events. You find a new job, meet someone special, have a family. You live a completely normal life, occasionally troubled by dreams you can't quite remember. And Timeline 0 Omega, the voice said as a third elevator appeared. This one showing only Sarah's. Empty apartment with a single addition, a suicide note on the kitchen table. The version where the psychological trauma of tonight's experience proves too much to bear. Sarah stared at the note, recognizing her own handwriting, even though she had never written those words. How many timelines are there where I don't survive this? 47, the voice answered without hesitation. Out of the 836 possible outcomes we've calculated so far, the statistics are actually quite favorable. You have an 85.6% chance of surviving the next 24 hours across all timelines. That's not as comforting as you might think, Sarah said. The building's laugh was like the sound of 1,000 doors opening and closing simultaneously. We're not trying to comfort you, Sarah. We're trying to understand you. Your species fascinates us, the way you cling to the illusion of free will, even when presented with evidence that every choice is predetermined by prior causes. The elevators around her began to merge and split like living cells, their walls becoming permeable. Sarah watched versions of herself walking between different scenarios, carrying memories and experiences from one timeline to another. Sarah's looked terrified, others appeared calm and analytical. A few seemed to be enjoying the surreal experience. What happens if I refuse to choose? Sarah asked. Impossible, the voice replied. Not choosing is itself a choice. Inaction creates its own timeline branches. Even death is just another data point for our research. Then what do you want from me? We want you to choose consciously, the voice said, with full knowledge of the consequences. Most of our subjects make their decisions based on fear, confusion, or incomplete information. But you've seen the alternatives. You understand the true nature of this place. Your choice will be the first one made with genuine, informed consent. The service elevator that had started everything began to glow with soft blue light. The scratches on its walls rearranged themselves into words. Press call button to repeat experience, and walk away to randomize outcome. If you press the button, the voice explained, you'll experience all possible versions of tonight simultaneously. You'll become a permanent resident of floor 29, existing across all timelines at once. You'll help us understand the nature of consciousness, identity, and choice. Your individual self will be dissolved, but your essence will become part of something much larger. And if I walk away? Then you return to Timeline Prime, but the memory editing process is imperfect. Fragments will remain. You'll spend your life wondering if any of this really happened, questioning the nature of reality itself. You'll be haunted by glimpses of the other Sarahs, brief moments where you remember what you've seen here. Sarah looked around at the infinite network of elevators, each containing a version of herself making this same choice. In some, she could see herself stepping into the service elevator. In others, she was turning away and walking into the darkness beyond. How many versions of me choose to press the button? She asked. So far, none, the voice admitted. Every Sarah we've observed has walked away, but that doesn't mean every Sarah will. Free will may be an illusion, but it's a persistent one. The elevators began to fade, leaving only the service elevator with its glowing call button and the infinite darkness surrounding them. Sarah could hear the whispers of her alternate selves growing fainter, as if they were being pulled back to their respective timelines. Time is running out, the voice said. The building's patience is not unlimited. If you don't choose soon, we'll choose for you. Sarah stepped toward the service elevator, her hand reaching for the call button. Around her, the whispers of 836 possible futures held their breath, waiting to see which timeline would become real. Sarah's finger hovered inches from the call button, trembling in the blue light emanating from the service elevator. Around her, the darkness pulsed like a living thing, waiting for her decision. But as she stood there, suspended between choice and consequence, something unexpected happened. She began to laugh. "You made a mistake," she said to the voice that spoke for the building. "A critical error in your calculations." The darkness around her shifted uneasily. "Explain. You showed me too much, Sarah continued, her laughter growing stronger. You let me see all the timelines, all the possibilities, all the other Sarahs making this same choice. And in doing so, you revealed something you didn't intend to. The service elevator flickered, its blue glow wavering like a candle in wind. What did we reveal? That in every timeline, every scenario, every possible version of tonight's events, I'm still me. I'm still Sarah Chen, the woman who asks too many questions, who can't leave well enough alone, who solves problems by thinking them through logically. She stepped back from the elevator, her hand falling to her side. And that's exactly why I'm not going to play your game. The building's voice became sharper, more urgent. You must choose. The system requires input to continue. No, Sarah said simply. I don't have to choose between your predetermined options. That's the flaw in your entire premise. You've created a false binary. Press the button or walk away. But those aren't the only possibilities. She turned her back on the service elevator and began walking into the darkness, but not toward any exit or escape route. Instead, she walked perpendicular to the choice, moving in a direction that hadn't been offered. Where are you going? The voice demanded. There is nothing in that direction. Exactly, Sarah replied. I'm going where your calculations didn't account for. Into the space between your predetermined outcomes. As she walked, the darkness around her began to change. Instead of the oppressive void she'd been experiencing, light started to seep in from somewhere. Not the harsh fluorescent glow of the office building or the emergency lighting of the elevator, but something softer and more natural. Dawn light, she realized. The real world bleeding through the artificial construct of floor 29. Impossible, the voice hissed. You cannot exit the scenario without making a choice. I just did, Sarah said, continuing to walk. You see, you made another mistake. You assumed that because I worked for Nexus Corporation, because I broke into this building looking for evidence, that I was driven by the same motivations as all your other subjects. But you were wrong about why I'm really here. The light grew stronger, and Sarah could see the edges of the artificial reality beginning to fray. The infinite elevator network became transparent, revealing the simple truth beneath. She was still in the service elevator, had never left it, was still trapped between floors 28 and 29 of a very ordinary abandoned office building. I didn't come here for revenge against Nexus Corporation, she continued, her voice echoing strangely in the small metal box. I didn't come here looking for evidence of conspiracies or cover-ups. I came here because 3 months ago, my younger sister Maya disappeared while working as a night cleaner in this building. The building's voice fell silent. Maya Chen, 22 years old, last seen entering the Meridian Tower at 11:47 p.m. on June 15th. Security cameras show her going in, but never coming out. The police investigation lasted exactly 3 days before they declared it a cold case. No leads, no evidence, no explanation. Sarah reached out and touched the elevator wall. The scratches she'd seen earlier were still there, but now she could read what they actually said. Not messages about waiting between floors or warnings about floor 29, they were names. Dozens of them carved into the metal by desperate fingers. Maya Chen was there, scratched deep into the wall near the button panel. You've been collecting people for years, Sarah said. Not just curious investigators or corporate whistleblowers. Anyone who worked in this building after hours. Anyone who stayed late enough to encounter your interdimensional research project. The elevator shuddered, and for the first time since this began, Sarah heard genuine mechanical sounds, the grinding of gears, the protest of cables under strain. The real elevator trying to move. Maya was never part of your study, Sarah continued. She was just collateral damage. A night cleaner who happened to be in the wrong place when your experiments were running. But she fought back, didn't she? That's why her name is carved so deep. She refused to accept your false choices. The building's voice returned, but weaker now, more human. Your sister was an anomaly. She damaged our equipment before we could process her properly. She escaped, Sarah said with fierce pride. Maya found a way out that you didn't account for. And her escape route is still here, isn't it? That's why this elevator really stopped between floors. Not because of your interdimensional manipulation, but because my sister sabotaged it on her way out. Sarah found what she was looking for. A maintenance panel that had been pried open and hastily closed. Inside, several wires had been cut and reconnected in a configuration that made no sense for normal elevator operation. But Maya had always been good with electronics, better than most people realized. She rewired your access point, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. Turned your own technology against you. This elevator isn't trapped between dimensions anymore. It's trapped between floors because she made sure it would be. Sarah pulled the rest of Maya's improvised wiring free. The elevator immediately lurched downward, cables screaming as it dropped 3 floors before the emergency brakes engaged. When the doors opened, she was looking at the real lobby of the Meridian Tower, dusty, abandoned, but utterly mundane. No Ronald behind the security desk. No impossible architecture stretching into infinity. Just an empty building that had been closed for 3 years, exactly as it should be. She walked across the lobby, her footsteps echoing normally in the empty space. The revolving doors turned easily when she pushed them, and she stepped out into the cool night air of the city. The same homeless man was still sleeping in the doorway across the street, exactly where he'd been when she arrived. Sarah checked her phone. 4:23 a.m. She'd been in the building for less than 5 hours, not the subjective eternity she'd experienced. But there were 17 missed calls from the same number, and when she dialed it back, her sister's voice answered on the first ring. Sarah, thank God I've been trying to reach you all night. I saw your location sharing. What the hell were you doing at the Meridian Tower? Looking for you, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. The police report said you disappeared 3 months ago. Police report. Sarah, what are you talking about? I quit that cleaning job last week to take a position at the veterinary clinic on 5th Street. I've been trying to tell you for days, but you haven't been answering your phone. Sarah pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it. The date on the screen showed June 8th, a full week before Maya was supposed to have disappeared, according to the timeline she remembered. Maya, she said carefully, what year is it? 2024, obviously. Sarah, are you okay? You sound really confused. Sarah looked back at the Meridian Tower. In the growing dawn light, she could see that it wasn't abandoned at all. Lights were on in several floors, and a maintenance crew was setting up equipment near the entrance. A sign by the door read, "Reopening soon, Meridian Tower Luxury Apartments." The building was never abandoned, she whispered. What building? Sarah, you're scaring me. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about timelines, about choices, about the space between predetermined outcomes. When she opened them again, she was standing in front of her apartment building, keys in her hand, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Dinner tomorrow? I want to tell you about my new job. The animals at the clinic are amazing. You'd love them, Sarah typed back. Yes, definitely yes. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she noticed that her reflection in the hallway mirrors looked slightly different than she remembered. More confident, maybe, or perhaps just more aware of how many possibilities existed in the space between one moment and the next. She never returned to the Meridian Tower, never investigated interdimensional research facilities, never tried to solve the mystery of Floor 29, but sometimes, late at night, she would catch glimpses of other Sarahs in her peripheral vision, the ones who had made different choices, who had pressed the button or walked away, who had become part of something larger or remained haunted by fragments of impossible memories. And sometimes, when she was feeling particularly curious about the nature of reality, she would simply smile and choose to make dinner plans with her sister instead. Because in the end, the most revolutionary act wasn't solving the mystery or uncovering the truth. It was recognizing that some questions were less important than the people you loved, and that the most profound choice of all was knowing when not to choose the paths that others had laid out for you. Maya was waiting at the veterinary clinic, surrounded by rescued animals and infinite possibilities. In a timeline where interdimensional research facilities were just the fantasies of people who spent too much time thinking about what might exist in the spaces between floors. And that timeline, Sarah decided, was exactly where she belonged. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.